Hello, and welcome to Your Estate Matters with your hosts, my colleague Greg Bernand and myself, Nicole Garten of Heritage Trust.
Your Estate Matters is a podcast dedicated to everything estates, including building and preserving your legacy.
If it's estate related, we'll be talking about it. We're having the conversations today that will help Canadians protect their families, their assets, and their legacies tomorrow.
Welcome to Your Estate Matters. With us today is estate planning lawyer Navrita Brar of Lindsay Kenny. A graduate of University of British Columbia and University of Victoria, Navrita was called to the BC Bar in 2020 and practices law at Lindsay Kenny in the areas of estate planning, estate administration, and business law. Navrita, thanks for being with us here today to talk about estate planning. Our first question is, what are the demographics of estate planning? How many Canadians have an estate plan?
Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. I'm very excited to be here and talk about one of my favorite topics, estate planning. I do a lot of these estate planning presentations, and I usually start by asking people, how many of you have a will? I think the statistics right now is it's about 50%, maybe less than 50% of Canadians have a will. But every time I've done them, it's always like a third of the room has one down. So it's like a lot less than you would think. Mm-hmm. And I think it goes deeper than that, in that if you talk to younger Canadians who are adults, who often own property, have children under the age of 40, even fewer have wills, because they just think that it's something that you need to have when you're a bit older and they're too young to have it. And then a lot of people think that their finances are too simple, that they don't need one. So there's a lot of reasons why there's just not quite as many as you would think that would have a will.
So what if somebody wanted to get started? What are the basic documents everybody should have in BC?
Well, the first, of course, is the will, which most people know about already. So that's usually number one. And then the things that people don't know about as much when they come to see me is other documents that deal with your incapacity. So for example, a power of attorney, which appoints someone to deal with your finances and legal affairs, either if you're not capable or if you just want somebody else to do it, if you're out of the country, or a variety of reasons why you might want someone to have that power. Or a representation agreement, which allows someone to make healthcare decisions for you and access your healthcare records. So usually when somebody comes in, I advise them to get a package and get all those documents done at once.
What are some of the special situations that require expertise?
Oh, there's a lot of them. And a lot of times people come in and say that they have such a simple estate. It's going to be quick, no problem. And then it ends up being the exact opposite. I think because it's hard to spot what some of these complexities are. One of them is probably a big one, which is blended families, which are very common. Families where you have a second or a further marriage and you have children from a previous relationship, either from one partner or both partners, and now you're doing your estate planning, and that requires a little bit more thinking about how you want to do things and what kind of documents might be included in that. Other kinds of complexities might be if you have a beneficiary that has a disability that you need to account for, if you have assets that are held in different structures, whether through a corporation or through a trust. And then if you have property that's outside of BC, that also needs to be taken into account.
And that's not just Canadian property. Foreign property, people forget
to
mention to their planner, the document writer. And should they have additional planning done for outside of Canada?
Yeah, it depends on what kind of asset it is that's outside of Canada. But for sure, you have a lot of people that own like vacation property in the US is a common one. And in those cases, you might want to consider having a will done in that jurisdiction as well.
So how does somebody go about putting a team together and hiring someone to help them get started?
Well, I think one thing is you have to feel comfortable with the person that you're getting to assist you in doing your estate plan. So with your lawyer, because it is kind of a very personal topic for a lot of people. You're going to have to delve into the types of assets that you own, your wishes, your family relationships. So I think finding someone that you're comfortable with. And then I think when you reach out to someone, you want to make sure that there's somebody that has a good level of experience in the area and understanding of the area, and that they're able to explain all of these things to you, because sometimes it sounds very complex. And you want to be dealing with someone who can simplify and break down for you and make sure that you understand. You're not just paying someone to make all these documents for you. You want to be able to understand what's in those documents.
So when might people need additional advisors, like say a tax accountant or an investment person or other professionals?
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation, but often if you own more than one piece of real estate, if you have a blended family, if there's any of those complications that I discussed earlier, it might have different tax implications for how we decide that we're going to pass things on to the next generation, in which case you might want to get an accountant involved. You might want to get somebody involved. If you don't have someone to be your executor, for instance, then you might want to get a professional trustee involved. And then if you have most of your finances dealt with by a financial planner, you might want to involve them in your estate planning, because they might have a more better, I guess, understanding of what's going on with your assets.
Now we talk about, families that are blended, but what about multi-generational families that live in the same unit, which is very common,
Yeah.
and that they intersperse expenses and businesses, and it's very important for them to have their documents done, considering all of their interconnections.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, myself, I'm Indian background, and a lot of Indian families, from what I know, will often have multiple generations of families living in one house, and with multiple members of that family that have contributed to the purchase of that house and maintenance of that house over time. So planning ahead, having discussions with the family on what's going to happen when somebody passes away, and being proactive about it is going to save people a lot of headache going forward. Because I often see the other side of it, which is when someone has passed away and now there's this family that's left not knowing what to do, or in the worst case scenario, not getting along about what to do next.
Right. So when you're talking about that planning and the benefits of it, what does an estate plan cost, and what does not having an estate plan cost?
That's such a tricky question. I'm going to do the lawyer answer of say it depends. But it really depends, I guess, mainly on how complicated your estate is. So if it's relatively simple, then it might not cost that much. If we're doing the whole package, for example, and it's pretty straightforward for a single individual, it will probably be around $2,500. And usually, once I speak with you the first time and have a conversation with you, and I know what's going on, I can provide a more accurate quote, because people want to know when they're retaining somebody to help them with this. What is this going to cost me? I think for a couple, we have a package available as well. So most couples, it sort of mirrors each other. They're your documents. So it helps reduce the cost. And that might be around $3,500, $3,000 range. And then in terms of what it can save you, that's so tricky, because if you have everything done correctly, you'll never actually see those savings because it never happened to you. But I think everybody knows somebody where it all went wrong and they've ended up spending a bunch of money on legal fees. And, we have a very busy estate litigation practice at Lindsay Kenny that are very, very, very busy. So I can tell you that there are a lot of people that end up paying a lot more when they don't have something in place that is well above what the legal fees would have been if they had just done their estate planning.
And that would, when you're talking about external lawyers, it won't be just one lawyer. Different parties will be engaging lawyers,
Yeah.
and really diminish what's left in the estate for the various parties.
Yeah. And oftentimes those kinds of arguments about the way a estate should be divided up, it goes beyond the financial and it delves into family relationships and feelings between family members. So the cost can get out of hand really quickly because it's not all logic based. So that's also something to keep into mind. And when you're doing your estate plan, it's a way for you to tell your wishes to your family so they're not left guessing.
Yes.
So to avoid that expense and that conflict and those delays, what tips do you have for people? How should they get started?
I think sitting down with their family and having a discussion is the first step, maybe even before you reach out to a lawyer. And then reaching out to the lawyer would be the second step. But the reason I say that is because a lot of times having the transparency and conversations with family members can reveal a lot of things that you didn't know about what people might have been expecting, about which people want to volunteer themselves to be involved and be an executor, for example, and which people just want to stay out of it. And then from there, when you retain a lawyer, like for example, with me, I sit down with the clients and discuss basically what their assets are in. And I go sort of a deep dive into everything to see how everything is structured, whether or not there's beneficiaries named, how your property ownership structure is, and have all those conversations. And then, of course, conversations about your family relationships as well. It often becomes a conversation that turns into a little bit about delving into your life story, which is why I really like what I do. Because when you talk to people, you're not just talking about the finances, you're talking about the bigger picture, and you get to learn a lot about the person that you're talking to. And it's all really interesting. And I love engaging with people that way and finding out about them. And that's really what estate planning starts at the root is getting to all of that first.
That's wonderful, Navrita. Thank you so much for your time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered individual legal, financial, or tax advice. Make sure to consult the advisor of your choice to advise you on your own circumstances. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your Estate Matters. If you like this podcast, make sure to follow it on your podcast platform of choice.
Whether you are planning your own estate or you're acting as executor for somebody else's, Heritage Trust can help. Partner with Heritage Trust to protect your family, your assets, and your legacy.
If you would like more information about Heritage Trust, please visit our website at heritagetrustcompany.ca.
This podcast is produced by Podfather Creative.